The morning light barely touched the horizon when Elena pushed open the heavy doors of Riverside High School. It was 5:30 a.m., and the hallways were still wrapped in that peculiar silence that schools have before students arrive. Her keys jingled softly as she made her way to the janitor's closet, the same route she'd walked for the past 8 years. Elena wasn't the type of person who drew attention. At 42, she had mastered the art of moving through spaces without disturbing them. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the same navy blue work uniform every day. To most people at Riverside High, she was just part of the furniture, as ordinary as the lockers lining the walls or the bulletin boards announcing upcoming events. But ordinary people often carry extraordinary stories, hidden beneath the surface like treasures buried deep in the sand. Every morning followed the same pattern. Elena would start on the 3rd floor, working her way down. She'd sweep the classrooms, empty the trash bins, and wipe down the desks with careful precision. The teachers who arrived early would sometimes nod at her in passing, offering a quick good morning before hurrying to their classrooms. She always smiled back, a warm, genuine smile that reached her eyes, but conversations rarely went beyond that simple exchange. The students barely registered her presence at all. They'd rush past her in the hallways, lost in their own worlds of teenage drama, homework deadlines, and social anxieties. To them, she was invisible, just another adult doing a job they never thought much about. And Elena didn't mind. In fact, she preferred it that way. There was a certain peace in being unseen, a freedom in not having to explain yourself to anyone. Lunchtime was Elena's quiet sanctuary. While the cafeteria buzzed with the chaos of hundreds of students laughing, arguing, and trading food, she would find a small table in the corner. She'd pull out her brown paper bag, usually containing a simple sandwich and an apple, and settle in with a book. Sometimes it was a mystery novel, other times poetry, but always she had her earbuds in, listening to music that transported her somewhere far away from the clatter of lunch trays and teenage conversations. If anyone had looked closely, they might have noticed the way her fingers moved slightly as she listened, tapping rhythms on the table that seemed to follow patterns more complex than any pop song. They might have seen the distant look in her eyes, as if the music was pulling her into memories both beautiful and painful. But nobody looked that closely. Nobody ever did. The school day would wind down. Students would flood out of the exits like water released from a dam, and teachers would pack up their bags and head home to their families. But Elena stayed. She always stayed late, long after the last teacher had locked their classroom and the parking lot had emptied. This was when her real work began. Or at least the work she cared about most. The music department was on the 2nd floor, a wing of the school that smelled like wood polish and old sheet music. There were practice rooms lining one side of the hallway, each containing a piano or space for band instruments. At the end of the hall sat the main music room, and inside it, positioned like a throne, was the grand piano. Elena cleaned this area last every day, and she took her time with it. While she'd rush through other sections of the school with practiced efficiency, here she moved slowly, deliberately. She'd dust each practice room with unusual care, running her cloth along the piano keys with a tenderness that seemed odd for someone simply doing their job. Mr. Peterson, the music teacher, had noticed this once or twice. He was a friendly man in his 50s with graying hair and a passion for getting teenagers interested in classical music, which was about as easy as teaching cats to swim. He'd sometimes work late grading papers or preparing lessons, and he'd see Elena through the window of his office, gently cleaning the pianos. She really takes pride in her work, he'd thought to himself, feeling a vague sense of appreciation. It was nice to know someone cared about the instruments, even if it was just to keep them clean. But he never stopped to talk to her about it, never asked why she touched those keys with such reverence. It simply didn't occur to him that there might be a story there. The grand piano in the main music room was Elena's favorite. It was a beautiful instrument, a Steinway that the school had purchased 15 years ago with grant money. The black lacquer finish still gleamed when properly polished, and Elena made sure it always did. She would spend extra time on this piano, carefully dusting between the keys, polishing the wood until she could see her reflection in it. Sometimes, when she was sure she was completely alone, she would pause in her cleaning. Her hand would rest on the closed lid of the piano, and she'd stand there for a moment perfectly still, as if listening to something only she could hear. Then she'd shake her head slightly as if dismissing a thought and continue with her work. The other members of the janitorial staff liked Elena well enough. She was reliable, always on time, and never complained about the work. During their brief overlaps in the break room, she'd listen politely to their conversations about their families, their weekend plans, their frustrations with difficult stains or broken equipment. She'd laugh at their jokes and offer sympathetic nods when they vented about their troubles, but she rarely shared anything about her own life. When asked, she'd give simple answers. No, she didn't have family in the area. Yes, she liked her job just fine. No, she didn't have any special plans for the weekend. Her coworkers eventually stopped asking, accepting that Elena was just a private person. Everyone has a right to their own space, after all. What none of them knew, what nobody at Riverside High could have guessed, was that Elena's life before the janitor's closet and the early morning shifts had been entirely different. That the hands that now gripped mop handles and spray bottles had once commanded stages. That the woman who moved through hallways invisible had once held audiences spellbound. The books she read during lunch weren't random choices. They were often about music, about composers, about the golden age of concert halls in Europe. The music playing through her earbuds wasn't pop or rock. It was Chopin, Rachmaninoff, Debussy, and Beethoven, pieces so complex that most people couldn't even imagine playing them, let alone mastering them. And those nights when she stayed late, after everyone had gone home, she wasn't just cleaning, but that part of the story was still her secret, locked away as safely as the music rooms themselves after hours. For 8 years, Elena had maintained this careful distance between who she was now and who she had been before. She'd built walls around her past, creating a new life that was small and safe and predictable. A life where nobody asked questions she didn't want to answer. A life where she could be near music without having to face the painful memories it carried. But walls, no matter how carefully built, can't stand forever. Sometimes they crumble slowly, brick by brick, and sometimes they come crashing down all at once, brought down by something as simple as a staff party and a few teachers who thought they were just having innocent fun. Elena's carefully constructed invisibility was about to end, whether she was ready for it or not. The invitation had arrived in Elena's mailbox 3 weeks before the event. It was a simple printed card, the kind the school office made in bulk for various occasions. Annual staff appreciation dinner, it read in cheerful letters, with the date, time, and location printed below. For the first time in the school's history, the janitorial staff was officially invited. Elena had stared at that card for a long time, sitting in her small apartment after work. Part of her wanted to throw it away immediately. These kinds of gatherings made her uncomfortable. Too many people, too many questions, too much chance of someone getting curious about her life. But her supervisor had mentioned it several times, encouraging all of them to attend. "It's about time they recognized us," he'd said with a proud smile. "We keep this school running just as much as anyone else." So Elena had tucked the invitation into her purse, telling herself she'd just make a brief appearance and leave early. Nobody would notice if she slipped out after an hour or so. That was her plan. Show up, be polite, maybe eat some free food, and then disappear back into her comfortable invisibility. The night of the dinner arrived on a Friday in late April. The school auditorium had been transformed for the occasion. Tables were set up with white tablecloths, and someone had strung up twinkling lights across the ceiling. It looked almost magical. Nothing like the usual space where assemblies were held and students fidgeted through announcements. Elena arrived exactly 15 minutes after the start time, late enough that she hoped to slip in unnoticed. She'd changed out of her work uniform and into a simple dark blue dress, one of the few nice things she owned. Her hair was down for once, falling in soft waves past her shoulders. If any of the teachers recognized her at all, they might have been surprised by the transformation, but most still didn't really see her. The janitorial staff had been seated together at a table near the back, which suited Elena perfectly. Her co-workers were in good spirits, laughing and enjoying the novelty of being guests instead of workers. The food was catered, nothing fancy but better than usual, and there was a genuine warmth in the air as teachers mingled and celebrated another year nearly completed. After dinner, the entertainment began. This was apparently a tradition at these gatherings. Mr. Peterson stood up first with his acoustic guitar, performing a surprisingly good rendition of a classic rock song that had several teachers singing along. The math department head, Mrs. Chen, recited a funny poem she'd written about the trials of teaching geometry. A young English teacher did impressions of famous movie characters that had everyone laughing. The mood in the room was light and playful. People were relaxed, enjoying themselves in a way that rarely happened during the regular school day. As each performance ended, there would be applause and cheers, and someone else would volunteer to go next. Elena watched from her table in the back, a small smile on her face. It was actually kind of nice seeing these people she'd observed from a distance for so many years letting their guard down and just having fun. She found herself relaxing a bit, thinking that maybe this hadn't been such a bad idea after all. But then Principal Davies stood up with a microphone, his face flushed with good humor and probably a glass or two of wine. "This has been wonderful," he announced to the room. "But I think we need to make sure everyone participates. What do you say? Should we get everyone up here?" There was a chorus of agreement from the crowd. That dangerous kind of enthusiasm that happens when people are feeling generous and inclusive. Elena felt her stomach tighten. This was exactly the kind of thing she'd been afraid of. "Come on, we need someone from the back tables," called out Mrs. Reynolds, the art teacher, turning to look directly at where the janitorial staff sat. "You all have been such good sports coming tonight. Who wants to share something?" Elena's co-workers shifted in their seats. A couple of them laughed nervously. "I can't sing to save my life," one of them joked. Another stood up and told a quick funny story about his kids that got some chuckles. Elena tried to make herself smaller in her chair, hoping the attention would pass over her. But Mr. Peterson, riding high on the success of his guitar performance and genuinely meaning well, spotted her. "Elena," he called out, pointing in her direction. "You've been so quiet back there. Come on, everyone has to do something. Those are the rules tonight." Heads turned toward her. Elena felt her face grow hot. She shook her head quickly, trying to smile so it wouldn't seem rude. "Oh no, I couldn't," she said, her voice barely carrying across the room. But the crowd, fueled by the festive atmosphere and meaning no harm at all, began to encourage her. It started as gentle applause, then grew louder. "Come on, Elena," someone called. "Just tell us a joke or something." Another voice added. Her supervisor leaned over. "You don't have to," he said quietly. "But they seem pretty insistent. Maybe just go up and say a few words. Get it over with?" Elena's heart was pounding now. She could feel dozens of eyes on her. All these people who had never really looked at her before suddenly focused on where she sat. The applause continued, growing more encouraging. People were smiling at her, friendly and welcoming, thinking they were including someone who might feel left out. They had no idea what they were asking. For a moment, Elena considered just standing up and leaving, walking right out of the auditorium and never looking back. But something stopped her. Maybe it was pride, not wanting to seem rude or unable to be a good sport. Maybe it was the fact that her co-workers were watching, and she didn't want to embarrass them. Or maybe, just maybe, there was a tiny part of her that was tired of hiding. She stood up slowly, her legs feeling unsteady. The room erupted in supportive applause. "That's the spirit," Principal Davies called out cheerfully. Elena walked toward the stage, each step feeling like it took enormous effort. Her mind was racing. What could she do? Tell a story? Make a joke? She wasn't good at public speaking. She'd spent 8 years trying not to be noticed, and now here she was, walking toward a stage with everyone watching. As she climbed the steps to the stage, she could see the grand piano sitting there in the corner, the same piano she cleaned every evening. The same piano whose keys she knew as intimately as some people know the lines on their own hands. Mr. Peterson was grinning at her encouragingly. "You can do anything," he said. "Sing, dance, tell us about yourself. Whatever you want." Elena reached the center of the stage and turned to face the audience. The lights were bright, making it hard to see individual faces, which was somehow both better and worse. Her hands were trembling. She opened her mouth, thinking she might just say a few words of thanks and then flee. But instead she found herself turning toward the piano. The room went quiet. Curious, Elena walked over to the instrument, her fingers trailing along its smooth surface. She'd touched this piano thousands of times, but never like this. Never with people watching. Never with the intention of actually playing it where anyone could hear. She pulled out the bench and sat down. The height was wrong. She adjusted it carefully, buying herself a few more seconds. Her hands hovered over the keys, and she could feel her breath coming too fast. This was a terrible idea. She should stop now before it was too late. But her fingers were already finding their positions. Muscle memory that 8 years of silence hadn't erased. And in that moment, Elena made a choice. Maybe not consciously, maybe not even willingly, but she made it nonetheless. She was going to stop hiding. Mr. Peterson was watching from the side of the stage, his expression curious and encouraging. The teachers in the audience were settling into an attentive quiet, expecting perhaps a simple children's song or a halting rendition of something basic. Elena closed her eyes, took one deep breath, and began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor filled the auditorium like water flowing into an empty vessel. Soft at first, almost questioning, the melody emerged with a delicacy that immediately commanded attention. And in that moment, everything changed. The teachers who had been shifting in their seats went completely still. The sound coming from that piano wasn't what anyone had expected. This wasn't a person who could play a little. This wasn't someone pecking out a melody they half remembered. This was something else entirely. Elena's hands moved across the keys with a fluidity that seemed impossible. Her fingers flew through passages that would have tangled lesser players into knots. The music swelled and retreated, whispered and thundered, told stories without words. Every note was placed with perfect precision, yet nothing felt mechanical. Each phrase breathed with emotion so raw that it was almost painful to hear. Mr. Peterson's mouth fell open. His hand went to his chest, and he felt his eyes beginning to sting. He knew this piece. He knew how impossibly difficult it was, and he was hearing it played with a level of mastery that he'd only encountered in professional concert recordings. The woman he'd barely noticed for 8 years, the janitor who cleaned his classroom, was playing like someone who had devoted their entire life to this instrument. Around the auditorium, teachers were experiencing their own moments of shock and recognition. Some leaned forward in their seats, unable to believe what they were hearing. Others sat back, mouths open, trying to reconcile this sound with the quiet woman they'd never really seen before. The music continued to pour out of Elena and that piano. 12 minutes of some of the most complex and beautiful music ever written. And for those 12 minutes, Elena wasn't a janitor, wasn't invisible, wasn't hiding. She was purely herself, perhaps for the first time in years. The final note hung in the air like a question that nobody knew how to answer. Elena's hands remained on the keys for a moment, trembling now that the music had stopped. The auditorium was completely silent, so quiet that she could hear her own breathing, fast and shallow. Then it hit her all at once, what she'd just done. The walls she'd built so carefully over 8 years had just come crashing down in 12 minutes. Every person in this room had just seen something she'd kept hidden, protected, locked away where it couldn't hurt her anymore. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few seconds. Elena kept her eyes closed, afraid to look up, afraid to see the faces staring at her. She wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at her to get up and leave, to flee back into the safety of being invisible. But then someone started clapping. Just one person at first, slow, deliberate claps that echoed in the quiet space. Then another joined in, and another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium erupted into applause so thunderous that Elena flinched. She opened her eyes and looked out at the crowd. Everyone was on their feet. Teachers she'd passed in hallways for years without real acknowledgement were standing, clapping, some with tears streaming down their faces. Mr. Peterson was at the side of the stage, his hand over his mouth, shaking his head in disbelief. "Oh my God!" someone shouted over the applause. "That was incredible." Elena stood up from the piano bench on unsteady legs. The applause continued, washing over her in waves. She managed a small, uncertain smile, raising one hand in a brief wave before quickly walking toward the stage steps. But she didn't make it far. Principal Davies rushed up to her, his face transformed with emotion. "Elena, that W." Solely reserved history teacher Mr. Kumar was grinning widely. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Someone asked. "Have you performed professionally?" Another voice chimed in. "That was Chopin, wasn't it? The first ballade? I've never heard it played live before." Elena felt overwhelmed by the sudden attention, all these voices and faces pressing in around her. Her co-workers from the janitorial staff were making their way over too, looking just as shocked as everyone else. "I didn't know you could do that," her supervisor said, his eyes wide. "Elena, you're a concert pianist." "I was," she said quietly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "A long time ago." The room gradually settled as people realized she was trying to speak. They gave her space but remained close, hanging on every word. Elena looked around at all these expectant faces and felt something crack open inside her chest. Something that had been sealed tight for so many years. "I don't really talk about it," she began, her voice soft but carrying in the now quiet auditorium. "My life before I came here. But I suppose after that you deserve to know." Mr. Peterson pulled over a chair. "Please sit. Take your time." Elena sat down, grateful for it. Her legs still felt shaky. She took a deep breath, trying to figure out where to even begin. The teachers settled around her, some sitting on the edge of the stage, others pulling up chairs. The festive atmosphere from earlier had transformed into something else, something more intimate and real. "I trained at a conservatory in Boston," Elena said, her eyes focused on her hands folded in her lap. "I started piano lessons when I was 5 years old. My mother was a piano teacher, and she recognized pretty early that I had some talent. By the time I was a teenager, I was winning competitions. Got a full scholarship to the conservatory." She paused, and Mrs. Chen encouraged her gently. "That's amazing, Elena." "I thought I was going to have this big career," Elena continued, a sad smile crossing her face. "I performed in small venues, recital halls, a few concerts in Europe. Nothing huge, but I was building something. I got married to another musician, a violinist. We had a daughter. She was only 3 years old." The room had gone very quiet again, but this time it was different. People sensed where this story might be going, and the mood shifted from celebration to something more somber. Elena's voice dropped lower. "We were driving back from a performance. It was late, raining hard. A truck ran a red light." She stopped, swallowing hard. "My husband died instantly. My daughter Lily, she died 3 days later in the hospital. I was the only one who survived." Several people gasped softly. Mrs. Reynolds reached out and gently touched Elena's shoulder. Mr. Peterson had tears running down his face now. "I'm so sorry," Principal Davies said, his voice thick with emotion. "Elena, I'm so deeply sorry." Elena nodded, acknowledging his words, but continuing with her story as if she needed to get it all out now, while she still could. "That was 15 years ago. I was 27. For a while I tried to keep performing. I thought maybe music could help me heal, you know? But every time I sat at a piano in front of people, I would have these panic attacks. Couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All I could see was that night, the rain, the lights of the truck." She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "So I stopped. I walked away from music entirely, or tried to. Moved to different cities, took whatever jobs I could find. Ended up here 8 years ago. The janitorial position was available, and I took it." "But you stayed near music," Mr. Peterson said softly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You asked to clean the music wing." Elena looked up at him and nodded. "I couldn't completely let it go. Being around the instruments, hearing students practice, it was like staying connected to something I'd lost, but at a safe distance, you know? I could be near it without having to actually do it." "The late nights," Mr. Peterson continued, pieces clicking together in his mind. "I've heard piano music sometimes when I'm working late." "That was you?" "I would practice after everyone left," Elena admitted. "When the school was empty and nobody could hear. Just me and the piano, playing for myself, playing for Lily and David. It was the only time I felt close to them anymore." The teachers around her were visibly moved. Several were crying openly now. Even the toughest among them, Coach Bradford, who rarely showed emotion, was blinking rapidly and looking away. "But tonight," Mrs. Chen said gently, "you played in front of all of us. What changed?" Elena thought about that question. "I don't know if anything changed exactly. Maybe I was just tired of hiding, or maybe after 8 years some part of me was ready to try again. When I walked up on that stage and saw the piano, it felt like a choice. Keep running from it or finally face it." "What you did took incredible courage," Principal Davies said, "both the performance and telling us this now." "I'm not sure it was courage," Elena said with a small, tired smile. "I think it was more like I just couldn't hold it in anymore. You ever carry something heavy for so long that you forget you're carrying it, and then someone asks you to put it down, and you realize your arms have been aching the whole time?" People nodded, understanding the metaphor. "That's what tonight felt like," Elena continued. "You all pushed me up on that stage as a joke, as something fun. But when I sat down at that piano, it was like 8 years of weight just came pouring out through my fingers. I wasn't thinking about being afraid or about my panic attacks. I was just playing, really playing, for the first time since I lost them. Mr. Peterson leaned forward. Elena, what you did tonight, that level of playing, that's not something that comes from hobby lessons. You're genuinely gifted. Conservatory-trained professional doesn't even cover it. That was world class. I don't know about that anymore, Elena said. It's been a long time. The muscle memory is clearly still there, Mrs. Chen interjected. And more than that, the emotion. Elena, you didn't just play the notes. You made everyone in this room feel something profound. Around her, people murmured in agreement. The young English teacher spoke up. I've been to concert halls in the city. I've heard famous pianists. What you did tonight was just as good, maybe better, because it meant something. You could tell it came from somewhere real. Elena looked around at all these faces, really looked at them for the first time. These people who had been background characters in her carefully controlled world were now seeing her, truly seeing her. And instead of the fear and vulnerability she'd expected to feel, there was something else creeping in. Something that felt almost like relief. I recorded it, one of the younger teachers said hesitantly, holding up his phone. I hope that's okay. I started recording when you began playing because I could tell immediately it was something special. Elena's first instinct was to say no, to ask him to delete it. But she stopped herself. It's okay, she said instead, surprising herself. I'm going to ask you something, Principal Davies said, his tone gentle but serious. And I want you to think about it, not answer right away. Elena, would you consider teaching? We could use someone with your talent and experience in the music department. Even part-time, helping students, sharing what you know. Elena opened her mouth to automatically decline, but Mr. Peterson jumped in. Just think about it, please. What you have, what you can do, it shouldn't stay hidden. There are kids here who would benefit so much from learning from someone like you. The crowd around her echoed similar sentiments. Encouraging, but not pressuring. Elena felt overwhelmed again, but in a different way than before. These people cared. They actually cared, not just about her talent, but about her. Elena didn't sleep much that night. She lay in her small apartment staring at the ceiling, replaying everything that had happened. The performance, the applause, the tears, the stories she'd told. All those years of careful silence broken in one evening. Part of her felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't been since those dark days after the accident. But another part of her felt something she'd almost forgotten. Lighter somehow. As if speaking the truth out loud had released some of the pressure that had been building inside her for 15 years. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She picked it up and saw messages from numbers she didn't recognize. Teachers from the school who had apparently gotten her contact information somehow. The messages were kind, supportive, thanking her for sharing her story and her gift. One message made her pause. It was from Mr. Peterson. No pressure at all, but the offer stands. Think about it. The kids would be lucky to learn from you. So would I. Elena set the phone down and closed her eyes. Could she really do it? Could she teach? The thought terrified her, but it also stirred something that had been dormant for so long. A sense of purpose, maybe, or possibility. The weekend passed in a blur of emotions. Elena found herself going to the school on Saturday, even though she wasn't scheduled to work. She let herself into the music wing with her keys and sat at the grand piano. This time she didn't wait for darkness or solitude. She played in the afternoon light streaming through the windows, and it felt different. Less like hiding, more like existing. By Monday morning, the news had spread through Riverside High like wildfire. The younger teacher who'd recorded the performance had shared it with a few people, and it had somehow made its way onto social media. Not viral, not yet, but circulating among local community groups and school forums. Students who had never given Elena a second glance were suddenly looking at her with curiosity and respect. As she pushed her cleaning cart through the hallways that morning, she heard whispers. That's her, the janitor who can play piano like that. My mom showed me the video. It's insane. I didn't even know she existed before this weekend. Elena felt self-conscious under all the attention, but she tried to smile when students said hello. Some of them did now, which never happened before. A few even stopped to talk to her. Ms. Elena, a shy sophomore named Rachel, approached her between classes. I saw your performance. It was beautiful. I'm trying to learn piano, but I'm not very good. Do you ever give lessons? Elena was taken aback. Oh, I don't really teach, she started to say, but then caught herself. Did she? Could she? I'll think about it, she said instead, and the girl's face lit up. By lunchtime, Principal Davies called Elena to his office. She went nervously, unsure what to expect. But when she arrived, he greeted her warmly and asked her to sit down. "I've been thinking about our conversation Friday night," he began, "and I want to make you a formal offer. Part-time position as assistant music teacher. You'd keep your current benefits and base pay, but with additional compensation for teaching hours. You could start small. Maybe an after-school program a few days a week. See how it feels." Elena's hands twisted in her lap. "I don't know if I'm ready for that. What if I have a panic attack in front of students? What if I can't handle it?" Principal Davies leaned forward, his expression kind. "Elena, you played in front of 50 adults Friday night. People who surprised you, put you on the spot, and you were magnificent. I think you're more ready than you believe." "But teaching is different than performing," Elena protested weakly. "You're right, it is," he agreed. "It's often easier, actually. Because it's not about you anymore. It's about helping someone else discover what they're capable of. You'd be amazed how that shifts the pressure." Elena sat with that thought. Not about her anymore. About the students. About passing on something valuable. About keeping music alive in a way that honored everything she'd lost while creating something new. "Can I have some time to think about it?" she asked. "Of course. Take all the time you need." But the universe seemed to have other plans. That afternoon, the video of Elena's performance was picked up by a local news station. Someone from the school community had sent it in as a feel-good story. And by Tuesday evening, Elena found herself being contacted by a reporter who wanted to interview her. She almost said no. Almost deleted the voicemail without responding. But Mr. Peterson found her during her evening cleaning rounds and encouraged her to do it. "You don't have to share anything you're not comfortable with," he said. "But Elena, your story matters. Not just the tragedy, but the survival. The fact that you found your way back to music, even in secret. There are people out there who need to hear that." So on Wednesday afternoon, Elena found herself sitting in the school music room with a reporter and a camera operator. She wore one of her nicer outfits, not her work uniform, and she'd let her hair down again like she had the night of the performance. The interview was harder than she expected, but also easier. The reporter was respectful, asking gentle questions about her background, her training, what had brought her to Riverside High. Elena found herself opening up more than she'd planned, talking about David and Lily, about the accident, about the years of silence. "What made you decide to play again?" the reporter asked. Elena thought carefully before answering. "I don't know if I decided exactly. It was more like I'd been carrying this heavy secret for so long that when the moment came, I couldn't hold it anymore. Sometimes healing doesn't happen because you choose it. Sometimes it happens because you're finally ready to stop fighting against it." The interview ended with Elena playing a short piece on the grand piano. Nothing as intense as the Chopin from Friday night, but a gentler piece by Debussy that spoke of water and moonlight and quiet beauty. The segment aired on Thursday evening news. Elena didn't watch it herself, too nervous to see how they'd edited everything. But her phone exploded with messages. Friends she hadn't talked to in years, distant relatives, former classmates from the conservatory who'd somehow found her number, and students, so many students from Riverside High, asking if she'd teach them, telling her they'd been inspired, saying they wanted to learn from her. On Friday morning, Elena made her decision. She found Principal Davies before the first bell and told him she'd accept the position. Part-time assistant music teacher, starting with after-school lessons twice a week. "I want to start small," she said. "Work my way up to it. But I think I'm ready to try." Principal Davies smiled widely and shook her hand. "Welcome to the teaching staff, Elena. Officially this time." The news spread quickly through the school. By afternoon, Mr. Peterson had helped Elena set up a sign-up sheet for after-school piano lessons. They'd cap it at 10 students to start, he suggested. Keep it manageable. By the end of the day, 23 students had signed up, and more were asking if there was a waiting list. Elena stood in the music room after school, looking at that list of names. Young people who wanted to learn from her, who saw value in what she had to offer. It was overwhelming and terrifying and exciting all at once. "You're going to be amazing at this," Mr. Peterson said, coming to stand beside her. "You know how I know?" "How?" Elena asked. "Because you understand that music isn't just about the notes. It's about the feeling, the story, the humanity behind it. That's what you brought to that stage Friday night. That's what made grown adults cry, and that's what you'll teach these kids." Elena nodded, feeling tears prick at her eyes again. She seemed to cry more in 1 week than she had in the past 8 years. But these tears felt different. Not tears of grief or loss or fear. Tears of something new beginning. The first lesson was scheduled for the following Monday. Elena spent the weekend preparing, pulling out old teaching materials she'd saved from her conservatory days. Books with worn covers, sheet music with notes scribbled in the margins, methods for teaching beginners that her own mother had used with her. She practiced too, not hiding in the empty school this time, but in her apartment with the windows open. Let the neighbors hear, let the world know. She was done hiding. Monday afternoon arrived faster than Elena expected. 5 students showed up for the first session. Rachel, the shy sophomore who'd first asked about lessons. 2 freshman boys who were in the school band, a senior girl who wanted to learn before going to college, and a quiet 7th grader whose mother had seen the news story and thought lessons might help her daughter's anxiety. Elena felt her heart racing as they settled into the practice rooms. What if she couldn't do this? What if she froze up? What if the panic came back? But then she looked at their faces, young and hopeful and nervous in their own ways, and she realized Mr. Peterson was right. This wasn't about her. It was about them. Okay, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Let's start with the basics. Can anyone tell me why we learn scales? The senior girl raised her hand tentatively. To build finger strength? That's part of it, Elena said, warming to the topic. But it's also about muscle memory, about teaching your hands to move in patterns so that when you play real music, you're not thinking about where each finger goes. You're thinking about the emotion, the story you want to tell. She sat at the piano and demonstrated playing a simple C major scale. Then she played it again, this time with dynamics and expression, making even that basic exercise sound like music. Hear the difference? She asked. The students nodded, their eyes wide. Music isn't just technical, Elena continued. It's not just about playing the right notes at the right time. It's about communicating something that words can't express. It's about taking feelings that are too big or too complicated for language and turning them into sound. She paused, thinking about David and Lily, about 15 years of silence, about Friday night when she'd finally let herself be seen. Sometimes, she said softly, music is the only way to say the things we can't say any other way. That's what I want to teach you. Not just how to play, but how to speak through music. The students were hanging on every word. Elena felt something shift inside her, the last piece of resistance falling away. She could do this. She was meant to do this now, she said with a genuine smile. Let's see where each of you are with your skills, and we'll build from there. As the lesson progressed, Elena found herself relaxing into it. The students were eager and attentive. When she corrected hand positions or explained theory concepts, they listened. When she demonstrated techniques, they watched with focus and tried to replicate what she showed them. By the end of the hour, Elena felt exhausted, but in a good way. The kind of tired that comes from doing something meaningful. 3 months passed faster than Elena could have imagined. What started as twice-weekly lessons with a handful of students had grown into something much bigger. She was now teaching 4 days a week with a waiting list that kept getting longer. Principal Davies had officially moved her to a full-time teaching position, and she'd gradually reduced her janitorial duties, though she still couldn't help tidying up the music room after lessons. The students loved her. Word had spread not just about her incredible talent, but about the way she taught. Elena had a gift for understanding what each student needed. With the shy ones, she was patient and encouraging. With the overconfident ones, she challenged them to dig deeper. She taught technique, yes, but she also taught feeling, expression, the soul of music. Rachel, the sophomore who'd first asked for lessons, had blossomed under Elena's guidance. She'd gone from barely being able to play simple melodies to tackling intermediate pieces with growing confidence. More than that, she'd found her voice. The quiet girl who used to keep her head down in the hallways now walked with a bit more certainty. You did that, Mr. Peterson told Elena one afternoon as they watched Rachel practice. You gave her something to believe in, starting with herself. Elena shook her head modestly. She had it in her all along. I just showed her where to look. But Mr. Peterson knew better. He'd been teaching for over 20 years, and he recognized something special when he saw it. Elena wasn't just teaching piano. She was teaching resilience, showing students that broken things could be repaired, that loss didn't have to mean the end of beauty. The local news story had sparked interest beyond just the school. A small community arts center reached out. asking if Elena would consider performing at their annual fundraiser. She'd said no at first, the old fear creeping back in, but her students had encouraged her, especially Rachel. "You always tell us that music is meant to be shared," Rachel had said. "That keeping it locked inside is like keeping a light under a blanket. So don't you think you should take your own advice?" Elena had laughed at being called out by a 15-year-old, but the girl was right. So she'd agreed to perform one piece at the fundraiser. Just one, baby steps. The night of the performance arrived in early December. The community center was decorated for the holidays, warm lights strung across the small performance space. It wasn't Carnegie Hall, but to Elena it felt just as significant. This would be her first intentional public performance since the accident, the first time she'd chosen to step onto a stage rather than being pushed onto one. Her students came to support her, along with many teachers from Riverside High. Mr. Peterson sat in the front row, giving her an encouraging thumbs up. Principal Davies was there with his wife. Even some of her former janitorial co-workers had shown up, dressed in their Sunday best. Elena wore a simple black dress and had her hair pulled back elegantly. As she walked onto the stage, she felt the familiar flutter of nerves in her stomach. But this time they weren't accompanied by panic. This time they felt more like anticipation. She sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and looked out at the audience. Among the faces, she spotted Rachel beaming at her with pride. Elena smiled back, then closed her eyes and took a breath. She'd chosen to play Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece about moonlight and dreams and gentle beauty. It felt right for this moment, for this new chapter. As her fingers found the first notes, she felt that familiar sense of coming home. But this time, it wasn't a home she was haunted by. It was one she was rebuilding. The music flowed through her and out into the room, each note placed with care and love. She thought about David and Lily as she played, but the thoughts didn't bring panic or overwhelming grief. Instead, they brought gratitude. Gratitude for the time they'd had together, for the love they'd shared, for the gift of music that connected her to them still. When the piece ended, the applause was warm and heartfelt. Elena stood and bowed, and for the first time in 15 years she felt like herself again. Not the person she'd been before the accident. That version was gone forever. But a new version, one who carried her losses with her but wasn't crushed by them. After the performance, people came up to congratulate her. An older woman with kind eyes grasped her hand. "My husband died 5 years ago," she said quietly. "I thought I'd never feel joy again. But listening to you play, I remembered that grief and beauty can exist together. Thank you for that." Elena felt tears spring to her eyes. This was what music could do. This was why it mattered. As winter break approached, Elena proposed something ambitious to Principal Davies and Mr. Peterson. She wanted to organize a student recital at the school, a chance for her piano students to perform for their families and friends. Nothing fancy, just an opportunity to share what they'd learned. "I think it's a wonderful idea," Principal Davies said. "The students have come so far. They should have a chance to shine." The recital was scheduled for the last day before winter break. The auditorium, the same space where Elena had first revealed her talent months earlier, was set up with chairs for families. A program was printed listing all the students who would perform. Elena spent the week before helping her students prepare, working through their pieces, managing their nerves, reminding them that mistakes were part of music and part of life. "The goal isn't perfection," she told them during a group rehearsal. "The goal is to share something real. If you mess up, keep going. If you forget a part, improvise. The audience isn't there to judge you. They're there because they love you and want to support you." Rachel was scheduled to perform last, playing a piece by Schumann that she'd worked incredibly hard to master. The night before the recital, she came to Elena in tears. "I can't do it," she said. "I'm going to mess up. Everyone will be watching, and I'll freeze and I'll embarrass myself." Elena sat down with her, recognizing the fear in Rachel's eyes because she'd lived with that same fear for so many years. "Can I tell you something?" she said gently. "When I played at the staff party, I was terrified. I hadn't performed in front of people in 15 years. I thought I might have a panic attack right there on stage. But you were amazing," Rachel protested. "I was also scared," Elena said. "Being good at something and being scared of it can exist at the same time. But here's what I learned. The fear gets smaller when you focus on why you're doing it. Why are you playing tomorrow?" Rachel thought about it. Because I love the piece. And because I want my mom to hear how much I've improved. She's been so supportive driving me to lessons, and I want her to see that it was worth it. There's your answer, Elena said. When you walk onto that stage tomorrow, don't think about everyone watching. Think about your mom, and think about the music. Play for her and play for yourself. Everything else is just noise. The night of the recital arrived with nervous energy buzzing through the air. The auditorium filled with parents, siblings, grandparents, teachers, and friends. Elena stood backstage with her students, doing last-minute check-ins, adjusting ties, and smoothing down nervous hair. One by one, her students performed. Some played flawlessly, some made small mistakes, but all of them played with heart. Elena watched from the wings, proud of each of them for having the courage to step into that spotlight. Finally, it was Rachel's turn. The girl walked onto the stage with visible nerves, but she sat at the piano with the posture and poise that Elena had taught her. She placed her hands on the keys, took a breath, and began. The Schumann piece was challenging, full of dynamic changes and emotional depth. Rachel navigated it beautifully, and when she did stumble slightly in the middle section, she recovered gracefully, just as Elena had taught her. By the final measures, she was playing with real confidence, letting the music carry her. The audience erupted in applause. Rachel's mother was crying in the front row. The girl stood and bowed, her face flushed with pride and relief. As she walked off stage, Elena pulled her into a hug. "You did it," Elena whispered. "You were beautiful." "I was so scared," Rachel admitted. "But then I remembered what you said. I played for my mom and for myself, and the fear didn't matter anymore." After all the students had performed, Principal Davies came to the microphone for closing remarks. "I want to take a moment to acknowledge someone special," he said. "A few months ago, we discovered that one of our own staff members had an extraordinary gift. Elena didn't just share that gift with us, she's now sharing it with our students. Elena, would you come out here?" Elena walked onto the stage, surprised and a bit embarrassed by the attention. The audience applauded warmly. "I've been in education for 30 years, Principal Davies continued, and I've rarely seen a teacher make such a profound impact in such a short time. Elena teaches more than piano. She teaches courage, perseverance, and the power of not giving up on yourself even when life gets hard. We're incredibly lucky to have her." The applause grew louder. Elena's students were cheering from backstage. Mr. Peterson was grinning widely from his seat. As a surprise, Principal Davies said, "We're hoping Elena might close out this recital with a performance of her own. Elena, would you honor us?" Elena hadn't prepared anything, hadn't expected this, but as she looked out at all those faces, her students peeking out from backstage, Rachel giving her an encouraging nod, she realized she didn't need to prepare. She had music in her fingers, in her heart, in her bones. Time, no.